When the sealed tunnel of Black Hollow was cracked open for the first time in over a century, no one expected to find human bones arranged like they had been waiting. The air that escaped carried not decay, but kerosene proof that lanterns had burned until the very end. What happened inside that Montana mountain wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up buried by greed and silence. Stay to the end, because this true story will change how you think about justice, loyalty, and what the earth remembers. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. This is one truth the mountain could not keep. The morning in Black Hollow Valley carried that late autumn quiet where every sound felt too clear. Detective Mark Davis guided his cruiser along the dirt road, the radio silent, the mountains ahead half hidden in gray light. He had been sent from Helena County to oversee the reopening of the old mine sealed for more than a century, and to verify the safety logs before the media arrived. Halfway up the grade, a blur of movement crossed the road. Mark braked hard. A German shepherd stood there, steady and calm, tail down, eyes bright. A girl no more than 10 ran after him. "Rex, come," she called. The dog obeyed at once, and she turned toward the cruiser. "Sorry, sir. He doesn't like engines near the mountain." Her voice was small but certain. Mark rolled down the window. "That your dog?" "Yes, sir. I'm Lily Carter. We live below the ridge." She hesitated. "My great-grandpa worked in that mine. They said he never came out." Mark nodded, used to stories that began with loss. "I'm here to make sure nobody gets hurt reopening it." She looked past him toward the slope where the timbered entrance waited like a scar in the hillside. "He can smell bad air," she said, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "He doesn't like what's in there." Mark didn't argue. "Then keep him back from the tape." He eased forward, leaving them by the road. At the site, 3 company trucks sat in a row, their engines ticking in the cold. The supervisor, Howard Mills, approached with a clipboard. "Detective Davis, right. We've hit a small snag. Gas readings show unstable pressure. I'm suspending entry until it checks the sensors." Mark took the printout, eyes tracing the neat columns of numbers. The timestamps repeated identically across 2 hours. "Which sensor?" he asked. "C12 near the barrier," Howard said too quickly. Mark crouched by the monitoring hub and pulled the data card. On his tablet, the file showed entries logged 15 minutes into the future. Someone had fed it fake data. He slid the card back in. "No entry for your crew," he said evenly. "But the county inspection stands. I'll walk the perimeter." Howard hesitated, then sighed. "Sheriff Coleman asked us to wait until noon. Press is coming." Mark gave him a neutral look. "Then the sheriff can meet me out here." He signed the log sheet and headed toward the slope. The wind picked up sharp with pine and metal. Below the tape, Lily and Rex had followed quietly. The dog's ears twitched, his nose working the air. Mark stopped. "You shouldn't be here." "I just wanted to see," she said. She held out a small locket, its hinge nearly rusted shut. Inside was a faded photograph of a young man standing in front of the same tunnel, a badge glinting on his chest. "Thomas Carter," she said. "He was the watchman. They said it was an accident, but my grandma never believed that." Mark studied the picture, the steady gaze of a man who looked too alive to have vanished. He handed it back gently. "I'll make sure his name's in the report." Lily slipped the locket under her jacket. Rex gave a low sound, not a growl, just a note that trembled between curiosity and warning. Mark turned toward the concrete seal that blocked the old tunnel. The slab was pale against dark stone, the welded bars streaked with rust. He laid a palm against it, cold, solid, no give. Behind him, the girl waited. The dog pressed close to her leg, both motionless in the wind. Howard stood farther off, phone in hand, pretending to type. "At noon, the sheriff wants statements," he called. "You can tell him we're safe," Mark replied. He photographed the barrier logged coordinates and made a slow circle of the site. No gas smell, no seep, no visible crack, only the sense of a place holding its breath. When he looked back down the trail, Lily was still there, her small figure outlined against the trees. Rex's head lifted toward the sealed mouth of the mine. The dog didn't bark. He simply stared as if listening to something behind the stone. Mark felt the chill rise up his arm again. He zipped his jacket, made a note in his pad, and told himself it was only the mountain's draft, just old air waiting for daylight. The following morning broke with a pale light that bled slowly over the ridge, turning the frost on the grass into a thin glitter that vanished when touched. Detective Mark Davis parked by the lower Trailhead Coffee, cooling in the cup holder, his report folder balanced on the dash. The county wanted hourly updates, but all he had so far was a falsified gas reading and a girl's quiet conviction that her great-grandfather was still inside the mountain. A pickup pulled in behind him, its brakes sighing. The man who climbed out wore a canvas coat older than most of the trees around them. "You're the new law," he said, voice creased by years and cold air. "Earl Thompson. My dad worked Black Hollow when I was a boy." Mark shook his hand and saw the same steadiness that lived in men who had buried more friends than photographs. Earl looked past him toward the slope. "You planning to open that door?" "The orders to inspect and document," Mark said. "Nothing more for now." Earl's eyes narrowed. "They said that in 59. Said it in 73. Said it again after the flood. Every crew quits after something happens. Some fall sick, some just leave in the night. Always the same story noise in the dark tools, missing pressure lines burst without reason." Mark listened, not ready to dismiss him. "You were on one of those crews, no. But I helped pour the second seal. The concrete steamed that day like it didn't want to harden." Earl reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of yellowed paper. "These are names," he said. "Men who went in and didn't finish their contracts. Company said they walked away. My brother kept this list." The paper trembled in his gloved hand. Mark unfolded it carefully, seeing half a dozen signatures written in the same pencil dates beside them, all ending within a month of each other. Later, back in the cruiser, he matched the names against the county payroll database. Each record ended with the same notation settled in full. A payout column marked discretionary. He traced the routing number to a dormant account linked to the same corporate parent now reopening the site. The silence that followed was heavy. He shut the laptop and looked up through the windshield at the ridgeline where fog dragged like smoke. When he returned to the site, the workers had not yet arrived. Only Lily stood by the fence, Rex beside her, both framed against the dull concrete of the barrier. "You're early," Mark said, pulling on his gloves. "Mom thinks I'm at school," she answered. "She says this place is bad luck." Rex sniffed the air, ears pricking toward the entrance. "He still doesn't like it," Lily added. "I found something else." She reached into her coat pocket and brought out a small locket, the hinge stiff with rust. It was in a box in our attic under some old uniforms. She opened it carefully, revealing a sepia photograph. The man in the picture stood at the same tunnel entrance, arms crossed, coat buttoned, and on his chest glimmered a metal badge, six-pointed, marked with an eagle crest, identical to the current Helena County Police emblem. Mark's breath shortened, not from fear, but from the strange geometry of coincidence. "Do you know who he is?" he asked. "My grandma said his name was James Harlow," Lily said. "He was a deputy then. They said he died in a collapse trying to save the miners. But this badge..." She paused, studying it with her small, serious eyes. "It's like yours." Mark examined the photograph again. The curve of the tunnel behind the man matched exactly with the one sealed before them down to the grain of the support beams. He pulled a field magnifier from his vest and looked closer at the badge. The number beneath the crest was visible, faint but certain, 0137. His own was 137. The same sequence continued through generations. You didn't show this to anyone else? No, she said. Mom said it was just a story, but if he was a deputy, why would he be down there? Shouldn't he have been outside? Mark closed the locket and handed it back gently. Sometimes duty doesn't stop where it's supposed to. He crouched to Rex's level and let the dog sniff his glove. The animal's tail moved once slow, uncertain. He listens to you, Mark said. That's rare. He listens to the ground more, Lily replied. Her gaze drifted toward the concrete wall. It hums sometimes. You can't hear it until you're quiet. Mark glanced at the instruments near the barrier. The pressure sensors blinked green, reading normal. He thought of Earl's story of payments and silenced men, of how easy it was to bury truth under paperwork. You need to head home now, he said softly. I'll come by later, talk to your mother. She won't want to talk about it, Lily said. But you can try. She tugged Rex's collar, and together they walked back down the path. The dog looked over his shoulder once, nose lifted to the wind. Mark stayed by the fence until their shapes vanished among the trees. He turned back to the slab, running his thumb over the cold surface. Behind that wall were answers tied to names both living and dead. He took one more photograph of the barrier and then of the surrounding ground where frost had melted in uneven patches, leaving the faint smell of oil and rust. Somewhere inside the rock, something waited for sunlight that never reached this far. As he packed his gear, he looked once more at the ridge, thinking of the man in the locket, the badge, the number, the same oath repeated through time. He didn't believe in curses, but he knew history had its own ways of speaking. The mountain was already whispering. He just had to listen long enough to hear what it meant. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of slate, and the wind that rolled down from the higher peaks carried a bite sharp enough to taste. Detective Mark Davis stood with his gloves pressed against the cold steel of the monitoring tripod, watching the laser sensor trace a red line across the face of the concrete seal. The machine's low hum filled the narrow cut of the valley. Howard Mills hovered a few steps behind him. Collar-raised voice clipped. County-approved controlled drilling, he said. You'll want to log it. Mark nodded, writing the time into his notebook. 2 minutes, the foreman called to his crew. The drills came alive, a metallic roar echoing off the canyon walls, sending vibrations through Mark's boots and deep into the bones of the hill. Dust rose like smoke. He felt it in his chest more than he heard it, a rhythm steady and old. A fine crack began to spread across the barrier, jagged as lightning frozen in stone. The foreman lifted a hand, and the drills wound down their echo, retreating into the mountain until there was only silence. Then came the hiss, soft, almost polite. The air that escaped through the crack brushed Mark's face cold and thin, carrying with it a faint scent that stopped him mid-breath. Not rot, not earth kerosene. The smell was sharp but clean, the same as the old lantern oil used in mining lamps a century ago. For a moment he saw the image the scent suggested, men crouched in darkness, flame trembling at the edge of sight, their world shrinking with each flicker. The foreman rubbed at his neck. That's not right, he murmured. Could be trapped gases, Mark said, though his tone betrayed the uncertainty he felt. Ventilate the line before continuing. The crew backed away, setting fans along the slope to draw the stale air out. The smell lingered faint but stubborn, threading through the cold like memory refusing to fade. Howard looked uneasy. It's been sealed 100 years. That air should have gone sour. Mark agreed silently. Whatever waited inside hadn't died. It had simply been waiting. A bark broke the stillness. Down by the fence, Lily had returned Rex at her side. She waved for attention, her mitten bright against the dark. Mark started down the path, dust crunching under his boots. You can't be this close, he said when he reached her. They're drilling. I know, she replied. We were at the overlook. Rex started acting strange. He kept pulling toward the gate. The dog sniffed the ground near the runoff ditch, pawing at a patch of loose gravel. Mark knelt beside him. "Easy, boy." The gravel shifted under the dog's paws, revealing the edge of something small and wooden, its surface darkened by soil. Rex dug carefully, snout low, until a tiny toy car came free, wheels carved from the same piece of pine axles fixed with handmade nails. The smell of old resin rose from it when Mark brushed the dirt away. Lily's eyes widened. "I know that pattern," she whispered. "My grandpa used to carve the spokes like that with a nick on one side so the wheels looked like they were turning." She reached out and traced the grooves with her fingertip. "He made one just like it for my mom when she was little." Mark turned the toy in his gloved hand. The grain of the wood had been polished smooth by time, but the design was clear, simple, practical, crafted by someone who built beauty out of what little he had. "Where exactly was this buried?" he asked. "Just under the gravel line," Lily said. Rex wouldn't stop digging there. Mark studied the ground. The patch lay directly below the barrier's left seam, where runoff from the hillside had washed debris for decades. It was possible the toy had been caught in the soil when the tunnel was first sealed, rising closer to the surface with each spring thaw. Or maybe it had been placed there deliberately. He couldn't say which thought unsettled him more. Rex stood beside them, tail-low eyes fixed on the concrete wall. The dog gave a low, steady whine that trembled in the still air. Mark felt it echo in his chest, a sound that carried neither fear nor warning, just recognition. "We'll keep this," he said quietly, slipping the toy into a sample bag. "It's evidence now." Lily looked up, her expression unreadable. Evidence of what Mark didn't answer. He glanced back toward the barrier. The crack had widened slightly, dust sifting out in slow silver drifts. Inside that, mountain lanterns had once burned until they could not. The kerosene scent was proof enough. "I'll take Rex home," Lily said finally. "He's nervous." Mark nodded. "Good idea. Stay clear of this site until I tell you otherwise." She hesitated. "You smelled it too, didn't you?" "The oil." He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "And that means they were alive longer than we thought." Lily pressed her lips together, then turned away, the dog walking close at her heel. Mark watched them until they disappeared down the trail, the faint jingle of Rex's collar fading with distance. The wind shifted again, carrying the lingering trace of kerosene down the slope. Mark looked back at the crack in the wall where darkness now showed like a thin line of ink. He wrote a single note in his pad, "Air exhaled smells of light." The words felt strange but right. He closed the book and faced the waiting mountain, knowing that what had been sealed for a century had begun at last to breathe again. By the next morning, the wind had shifted west, and the air over Black Hollow carried the smell of wet earth and diesel. A faint drizzle darkened the rocks as Detective Mark Davis signed the final clearance for entry. The engineers had set temporary supports and drilled narrow vent holes to equalize pressure. Howard Mills checked his watch nervously while the foreman adjusted his mask. "You sure about this, Detective?" Howard asked. "We've still got unstable readings." Mark tightened the straps of his respirator. "If we wait for perfect numbers, the century might start over," he said quietly, stepping toward the opening. Inside the mountain, the beam of his headlamp cut through dust that shimmered like snow. The tunnel swallowed sound. Every step on the old rail ties echoed forward before falling away. The air carried the same faint kerosene trace, mixed now with the mineral tang of rust. Behind him, 2 workers followed at a distance, their lights small against the dark. Wooden support beams lined the passage, bowed slightly by time. Mark paused to study one where the wood had splintered inwards. The pattern looked like it had been hit from the wrong side, pressure pushing outward, not in. A few feet ahead, something caught the edge of his light, a leather-bound object jammed behind a cracked beam. He crouched, brushing away the powdery film until the shape came free, a small notebook, its cover softened by moisture and age. He opened it carefully, the paper thin as breath. The first page bore a name almost gone to fading Deputy J. Harlow, Helena County. The ink had run in places, but on the following page in steadier hand, a badge number remained clear, 137. His number. Mark stared at it, throat tightening beneath the mask. The air felt suddenly colder the walls closer. He flipped through the next pages, finding short notes, patrol entries, supply counts, lists of tools. The last line, dated July 1903, read, "Only all 8 present. Seal to be closed by order above. God forgive us." He closed the notebook and stood heart pacing slower than his thoughts. Howard's voice crackled through the comm radio clipped to his shoulder. "Detective status. Found evidence." Mark answered. "Old. Police issue. Copy that," Howard said, after a pause, his tone shifting from curiosity to unease. Mark slid the notebook into a sealed pouch and moved deeper down the tunnel. The ground sloped gently, rails half buried under silt. A trickle of water ran along one side, whispering like a secret. After a few hundred feet, a new beam of light flickered behind him. He turned to see Lily standing at the entrance bend, Rex close at her side, both speckled with dust. "I told you to stay outside," Mark said, voice echoing sharper than intended. "Mom brought me," she replied, pointing toward the outline of a woman waiting near the safety lights outside. "She said I could look for 1 minute. Rex won't go farther than he should." Mark sighed but waved her forward. "Stay close. No touching the walls." She obeyed, eyes wide at the labyrinth of timbers and shadows. The beam of her flashlight found something on the right-hand wall, a patch where the soot had been scraped away. Letters appeared uneven and trembling, carved with something blunt. "Look," she said. Mark stepped closer. The words formed a simple line. Still waiting. Beneath it, initials TC. The light trembled in his hand. "Thomas Carter," he whispered. "That's your great-grandfather." Lily nodded slowly. "I've seen that handwriting before," she said. "At school on the memorial wall. The carving they found near the mine shaft, they framed it. It looked the same the way he made the sea curl back." Her voice caught in the small air. "It's like he wrote this yesterday." Mark touched the grooves gently with his glove. The cuts were shallow but deliberate, each stroke layered as if carved over days, not minutes. The lower edges held a faint dark sheen, old resin maybe, or soot fused into the stone. He used the lantern smoke to trace it first, Mark said, then carved when the light ran low. Rex sniffed the wall and gave a quiet whine, his ears lowering. "We should go," Lily said softly. "It feels wrong to be here." Mark agreed but lingered another second, letting the reality sink in. The men inside hadn't died instantly. They had time enough to leave words enough to mark guilt and hope into stone. As they turned back, a gust of air brushed their faces, gentle yet certain, like the mountain exhaling again. Outside, the drizzle had thickened into rain. The workers waited near the generators, their breath white in the dim. Howard met them halfway, trying to read Mark's face. "Find anything worth the trouble?" he asked. Mark held up the sealed pouch. "A deputy's notebook. His number matches mine." Howard frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Mark said quietly, "we've got more to answer for than I thought." He glanced back at Lily, who held Rex's collar tight. The dog looked, restless eyes fixed on the dark entrance. The rain drummed softly on the plastic tarps, steady as a heartbeat. Mark didn't believe in signs, but he understood patterns, and this one was beginning to take shape, a lawman from 1903, a miner who could carve in the dark, a child who still bore the name, and a mountain that refused to forget. As the crew packed their gear, Mark looked once more toward the tunnel. Water ran down the fresh cracks like tears along an old scar. Tomorrow they would go deeper, and whatever waited beyond that carved message would no longer be history. The rain ended before dawn, leaving the valley washed clean and quiet. Mist hovered low, twisting through the pines like slow smoke. Detective Mark Davis stood by the tunnel entrance, the notebook from the day before sealed in a plastic evidence bag at his side. The crew waited behind him, murmuring softly, their voices dulled by the fog. Howard Mills approached, hands in his jacket pockets. "We cleared another 10 feet overnight," he said. "Support beams are intact farther in than expected." Mark adjusted his headlamp, nodding. "We go slow. No heavy drilling until I say." The air inside was colder today, the walls glistening where the rain had seeped through cracks. The lantern smell had faded, but left a metallic tang like coins rubbed between fingers. As they advanced, Mark kept one gloved hand against the stone, counting the rhythm of the old supports. Lily and Rex waited near the entrance, her mother standing watch under a tarp, anxious but silent. The beam of Mark's light traced the curve of the tunnel until it caught something odd along the left wall, a faint seam that didn't match the geological survey. "Hold up," he said. The crew halted. He stepped closer, brushing away dirt with a small brush. Beneath the grime, a narrow gap revealed itself, the outline of a sealed side passage no wider than a doorway. "This wasn't on the map," Howard said. "There's no record of a lateral shaft here." "It's here now," Mark replied, examining the alignment. The edges were smooth, deliberate, not the result of collapse. He called for a hand drill, and within minutes a section of the outer layer gave way, revealing a hollow space beyond. When the light reached through the opening, it glinted off something flat and metallic deeper inside. "Could be an equipment room," the foreman suggested. "Maybe an old storage alcove." Mark wasn't convinced. The angle was wrong. The floor sloped downward, and the air coming out was unnaturally dry, untouched by the moisture that clung to every other surface. He stepped through first, his boots landing on a patch of fine dust that rose like breath. The passage bent sharply, leading to a small landing, and then continuing straight for several yards. Rusted rails ran along the floor, ending at a steel door bolted into the rock. The company's logo was faint but legible beneath the corrosion property of Black Hollow Mining Co., restricted by law. The warning paint had faded, yet the words still carried authority. Mark ran his glove along the door seam. It was welded shut, but the welds were newer than the surrounding metal. "This was sealed later," he said, "long after the cave-in." The foreman leaned closer, squinting at the joint lines. "You're right. Look at the oxidation pattern. That's modern alloy, maybe post-World War II, which means someone reopened the mine," Mark said, then closed it again. He took a photo of the markings, focusing on the serial number etched near the handle. The digits were faint, but clear enough to trace. He stepped back, the beam of his light sweeping across the door. A fine layer of soot had settled near the bottom edge, disturbed only in one spot, where the dust was lighter, as if something had been moved or pressed there. "Whatever's behind this isn't from 1903, he said quietly. Howard shifted uneasily. "We should log it and wait for authorization." Mark agreed, but kept his gaze on the welds. The decision to reseal a mine decades later required permits, records, oversight, yet none appeared in county files. This door had been forgotten on purpose. Outside, Lily called his name faintly down the tunnel. "Detective Davis." "Are you okay?" Her voice carried the tremor of echo and worry. "We're fine," he answered, raising his voice to reach her. "Stay with your mom." Rex barked, once the sound distant but clear. It rippled through the hollow like a stone dropped into water. Mark felt the vibration in his chest before it faded. The echo came back uneven, split by something solid deeper behind the door. He glanced at the crew. "Hear that?" The foreman frowned. "Could be another chamber, or a void," Howard offered. "Old ventilation shaft, maybe." "No," Mark said, shaking his head. "The return's too sharp. There's structure behind it." He crouched to examine the dust again. A faint imprint marked the floor, half a boot sole old but not ancient, its tread pattern unfamiliar for 1903. He brushed away the surrounding dirt, revealing a fragment of modern rubber. He held it up under his light, realizing it wasn't from a miner's boot, but from an industrial work shoe, the kind manufactured only in recent decades. "Someone's been here," he murmured. Howard's expression darkened. "That's impossible. We're the first authorized entry." "Authorized," Mark repeated. "Not necessarily the first." He sealed the fragment in a sample bag, his mind turning over possibilities. The welds, the fresh alloy, the missing records, none of it fit the neat official story. "We'll bring in a survey camera tomorrow," he said. "I want to see behind that door before anyone touches it." As they retraced their steps, the mountain gave a low groan, a deep, drawn-out sound that made dust drift from the ceiling. The crew froze until it passed. When they reached daylight, the mist had lifted and the sun cut through in thin, cold shafts. Lily ran to meet them, eyes bright with questions. Mark didn't answer right away. He handed her a clean cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was the small wooden toy car, polished clean. "Your grandpa made this," he said. "It was near something else we found." She looked up, puzzled. "What did you find?" Mark's gaze shifted toward the dark opening behind him. "A door that shouldn't exist," he said. "And whoever put it there didn't want it found." By the time the sun lifted over Black Hollow the next morning, the frost had hardened into a thin crust that cracked beneath every bootstep. The air felt too still for the hour, as if the mountain was waiting for them to make the first sound. Detective Mark Davis arrived ahead of the crew coffee, cooling in his hand-eyes on the dark opening that led down to the newly found side shaft. The discovery of the steel door had spread through the site like a rumor that no one wanted to repeat aloud. Howard Mills was already there, face pale in the morning light. "We can't get it open without a plasma cutter," he said. "The weld's too thick." Mark nodded. "We're not cutting it yet. We'll take a look at what's around it first. If someone sealed this place in the mid-century, there might be equipment left behind." The two men stepped inside their lights, painting long beams across the damp rock. The floor of the hidden passage was drier than the main tunnel, as though it had been insulated. Dust clung to every surface, thick and undisturbed except for one corner where the floor dipped slightly. Mark knelt and brushed away the grime. His glove hit metal. "There's something here," he said. With Howard's help, he pried loose a rectangular box the size of a small suitcase, its hinges rusted nearly solid. They carried it closer to the light. The latch resisted until Mark wedged his knife beneath it. When it finally gave, the lid opened with a slow metallic sigh, releasing a faint breath of air that smelled of oil and paper. Inside lay several stacks of old documents bound by twine, their edges yellowed to the color of tobacco. Mark lifted the top ledger, and the embossed title caught the light. Helena County Sheriff's Office. 1903 Operations Record. He felt the weight of history in his hands, literal and moral. The ink had bled in places, but the handwriting was strong. The first few pages were routine patrol assignments, supply logs, names of deputies. Then the tone shifted. The entry, dated July 9th, 1903, began with the words, "By order of Chief R. Coleman, all access to Black Hollow Mine suspended until further instruction. Company to handle matters internally. Deputies to enforce perimeter and prevent interference." Mark's pulse quickened as he turned the page. July 10th. Miners refusing exit. 8 confirmed still inside. Sealed to be completed before nightfall. The next line was underlined twice in heavy pencil. "Do not approach without authorization. Compensation to be issued upon closure." He flipped through the following pages, his hands trembling slightly. Receipts were attached with paperclips payments from Black Hollow Mining Company to the sheriff's office. The sums were large, labeled as security expenses. At the bottom of one sheet was the signature that ended the air in his lungs, Chief Robert Coleman. the same surname as the current sheriff who had ordered the delay 2 days earlier. Howard Mark said quietly, "You need to see this." Howard leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the script. "Coleman," he murmured. "That's not a coincidence." Mark pulled out his phone, snapping photos of each page. "These records show they sealed those men in alive," he said. "The sheriff's office helped the company cover it." Howard stepped back, rubbing his neck. "You'll have to report this. It'll go public." Eventually, Mark replied, "Not yet. I need to know what else they buried." He checked the rest of the box, more receipts correspondence between company executives and county officials. The last envelope was stamped "Confidential." Inside were 2 letters dated a week after the cave-in. The first thanked the sheriff for expediting the closure. The second was more chilling. "All surviving family members have been compensated for loss of wages. No further inquiry warranted." Mark folded the papers back carefully, his breath steady but shallow. Every line confirmed the same truth. Those miners had not been victims of an accident. They had been casualties of greed. When he emerged from the tunnel, Lily was waiting near the trucks, holding the small wooden toy car against her chest. "You found something, didn't you?" she asked. Mark met her gaze, hesitating before he spoke. "Records," he said. "Old police files. About the men. About how they died." She nodded slowly, as if she had expected that answer all along. "My grandma always said the truth was locked away with them," she whispered. Rex stood beside her, ears flat, sensing the unease in the air. Howard joined them, shaking his head. "The county's not going to like this, Davis." "The county doesn't have to," Mark said. "It just has to listen." He sealed the lockbox with tape marking it as evidence. The cold wind shifted, carrying down from the mountain the faint rattle of loose stones, a sound almost like a sigh. "We'll send a copy of these files to the state archive," Mark continued, though his voice had lost conviction. "After that, we dig for the rest." As he turned toward the dark entrance once more, the sense of duty pressed against something deeper guilt that didn't belong to him but somehow ran through his badge, his number, his office. He wondered if justice, when delayed by a century, could still be called justice at all. The morning after the discovery was tense enough to feel like static in the air. Clouds hung low, hiding the peaks, and the workers moved with the distracted quiet of men who had already heard too much. Detective Mark Davis stood by the evidence truck, the lockbox from the hidden shaft sealed and tagged, waiting for state pickup. The ledger pages still burned in his mind, each line written in steady penmanship that now accused the very institution he worked for. Howard Mills came striding across the gravel with a clipboard pressed tight to his chest. "Davis," he said, voice brisk. "We're shutting this down. Effective immediately. County order." Mark looked up from his notes. "Whose order exactly?" "Public safety," Howard replied. "The tunnel's unstable. The foreman logged minor tremors overnight. We're resealing the entrance until structural engineers can reassess." Mark stepped closer. "You told me yesterday the readings were stable. Now you want it sealed." Howard avoided his gaze. "Things change. We can't risk a collapse. The crew's packing up by noon." Mark's jaw tightened. "This isn't about safety. You're burying evidence." "You're out of your lane," Detective Howard said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're contractors. You have your job, I have mine." Mark could hear the hum of the generator behind them, the faint thud of crates being loaded. He noticed Howard's radio clipped to his belt, the transmission light blinking red. "Who's that frequency belong to?" Mark asked. "Corporate liaison," Howard said too quickly. "Routine check-in." He turned away, pressing the talk button as he walked toward the trucks. Mark moved behind a stack of equipment and listened. Howard's voice dropped low, flattened to a careful rhythm. "Yes, sir. We've located the internal records. Contained. No, they don't know yet. The detective's thorough, but we'll close the shaft within the hour. Yes, same directive, reseal report, minimal. Understood. There was a pause then. The faint reply of a male voice through static, polished, and cold. Ensure compliance. Black Hollow Resources can't afford another incident tied to the legacy name. The words struck like a small, precise hammer. Black Hollow Resources, the corporate descendant of the original mining company. Mark felt the air leave his chest. The logo on every truck and jacket suddenly meant something darker, a century-old signature dressed in a new name. He stepped out from behind the crate. "Who's on that call, Howard?" he asked. Howard flinched, turning sharply. "Private conversation." "Black Hollow Resources," Mark said. "That's who you're talking to." Howard's face went still. "That's above my pay-grade, detective." "Not above mine," Mark said, taking the radio from his hand before the man could react. The channel still hissed softly. "This is Detective Davis, Helena County," he said into it. "Identify yourself." Silence followed, broken only by a short burst of static, and then the line went dead. Howard reached for the device, but Mark stepped back. "You understand what you just confirmed?" he asked. "Your company isn't cleaning a mine. You're cleaning a crime scene." Howard's composure cracked. "You don't know what you're stepping into. This operation was signed off by the state. You think you can stop a corporation with a badge and a file box?" "No," Mark said quietly. "But truth has a way of surviving." He pocketed the radio and turned toward the tunnel. The barrier now stood half covered by tarps as workers prepared new concrete mix. Lily and her mother waited near the fence. Rex restless beside them, the dog's tail twitching with agitation. Mark crossed to them. "They're trying to close it," he said. "Now?" Lily asked, alarmed. "They can't. You haven't shown anyone what you found." "That's why I need your help," he said, lowering his voice. "Keep your distance from the crew. Stay out of sight, but if you see them bring heavy sealant drums, let me know." She nodded, eyes wide with understanding. Rex barked softly, the sound sharp against the damp air. Mark turned back toward Howard. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You seal that door and it won't just be a safety violation, it'll be obstruction." Howard hesitated, torn between fear and orders. "Then get the sheriff out here," he said finally. "Until then, we're following protocol." Mark could almost hear the echo of that same phrase written 100 years earlier. Protocol as excuse law as cover. He walked to his vehicle and called the county office. The dispatcher's tone was polite but guarded. "Sheriff Coleman's unavailable," she said. "He's in a meeting in Helena. Get him out here now," Mark insisted. "Tell him I have documentation connecting his family to a criminal cover-up." The line clicked. She promised to relay the message. Mark hung up, staring at the dark mouth of the tunnel. The men had begun mixing concrete shovels, scraping in rhythm. Each sound felt like a nail sealing history shut again. He walked to the fence and spoke quietly to himself, almost a prayer. Not this time. Behind him, Rex gave a sudden bark, louder than before. The dog faced the mountain muscles tense, as if hearing something deep within the rock. Mark followed his gaze, feeling the faint tremor beneath his feet. A pulse, subtle but undeniable. The ground seemed to remember every lie ever pressed into it. He took a breath, squared his shoulders, and stepped toward the waiting dark. The wind picked up through the canyon, carrying with it the smell of wet concrete and cold steel. The workers moved faster now, urgency replacing caution. Detective Mark Davis watched from the edge of the clearing as they prepared to seal the tunnel, each shovel of gravel echoing like the final strokes of a grave being closed. His jaw clenched. The lockbox containing the 1903 police ledgers had been taken into corporate custody an hour earlier, loaded onto a transport van marked with the Black Hollow Resources logo. He had argued demanded a chain of evidence receipt, but Howard Mills simply quoted a legal clause about contractual jurisdiction and ordered him off the site. Lily stood nearby, half hidden behind a supply crate Rex pressed close against her leg. Her mother had been told to return to town for safety, but the girl had stayed stubborn in the way only someone carrying unfinished truth could be. "They're taking everything," she whispered. Mark nodded grimly. "That's what they do when the story's too heavy to carry." He checked his watch, still no response from the sheriff. The silence from Helena felt deliberate now. Howard's voice rang out across the clearing, commanding the crew to pour the first layer. The sound of the mixer roared to life, drowning out thought. Lily tugged at Mark's sleeve. "If they take the papers, no one will know," she said. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from urgency. "There's still one copy," Mark said, lowering his voice. "My phone's got photos, but if they get to it—" He stopped mid-sentence, realizing how quickly the company could erase digital traces. The official chain of custody would bury everything before sunrise. "Then we keep it another way," Lily said. She opened her backpack and pulled out the smaller duplicate of the ledger he had scanned the night before, pages still creased from the box. She crouched beside Rex, lifting his collar. "Hold still, boy," she murmured, sliding the folded papers into the narrow lining sewn beneath the tag. Rex stayed perfectly still, as if he understood. "If they search us, they won't check him," she said softly. Mark looked at her, momentarily struck by how calm she sounded. "That's smart," he said. "Very smart." "My grandpa always said the truth finds its own way out," she replied, "even if people bury it first." A shout cut across the air. Howard was approaching, clipboard in hand, flanked by two corporate guards in safety vests. "Detective Davis," he called. "I'm going to have to ask you to step back beyond the perimeter. The site is under corporate lockdown." "You don't have the authority to lock down a crime scene," Mark replied. The state commissioner's office authorized the closure, Howard said, keeping his tone civil but firm. "Direct order from Deputy Commissioner Robert Coleman, Jr." The name hit like cold iron. Mark took a step forward. "Coleman?" "Yes," Howard said, unaware of the depth behind the question. "He oversees regional environmental compliance. The order came through less than an hour ago. He's the great-grandson of Chief Coleman Mark," said slowly, his voice steady but weighted. "The man who signed the 1903 directive sealing those miners inside." Howard hesitated, his face paling as the connection sank in. "I just follow orders," he muttered. "Same as my grandfather probably did when he worked for the company." "And look where that got them," Mark said quietly. The wind caught his coat, lifting the edges like a flag in retreat. "How many generations have to lie before someone tells the truth?" Howard swallowed hard, his authority crumbling under the weight of what he'd helped conceal. "If you file this, they'll come after you," he said. "They've been covering this for 100 years. They won't stop now." "Neither will I," Mark replied. He glanced toward the tunnel where fresh concrete dripped into place, sealing away a century of silence. "You tell your people they're not poring over bones this time. They're poring over history." Howard lowered his eyes, saying nothing. Behind them, Rex barked once sharp and loud, the sound rolling through the canyon like an alarm. The workers paused, startled. The echo seemed to travel down into the ground, swallowed by the mountain's hollow breath. "Get him under control," one of the guards snapped. Lily pulled Rex close, whispering against his ear until he quieted. Mark stepped in front of them. "The animal stays with me," he said firmly. "You've got what you came for now. Clear the site until I speak with the sheriff. Your badge doesn't outrank the state," one guard said, but his voice lacked conviction. Mark ignored him. He walked to the edge of the clearing, watching the gray concrete spread over the entrance like frost. Every bucket felt heavier than stone. Every motion of the shovel wrote another layer of history's cover-up. He pulled his phone from his pocket and opened the last image, Robert Coleman's signature at the bottom of the 1903 ledger. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was identical to the one on the new closure order he'd received that morning. One family, one lie passed down like inheritance. Lily joined him, her hand resting on Rex's collar, feeling the faint outline of the papers hidden within. "It's safe," she said. "He'll keep it." Mark nodded, though he felt the weight of time pressing harder than ever. "For now," he said. He looked up at the gray sky, thinking of the miners waiting beneath of the deputies who'd sealed them there and of the men now repeating the same act under the same name. "The past doesn't stay buried," he murmured. "It just waits for someone brave enough to dig." By late afternoon, the wind had changed, rolling down the mountain in long, moaning gusts that carried the smell of rain and iron. The sky had darkened to the color of ash clouds pressing low enough to touch the treetops. Detective Mark Davis stood beside his cruiser, watching the crew pack up under the first drops. The tunnel mouth, now half sealed with wet concrete, glistened like a wound that refused to close. Lily sat in the cab of her mother's truck nearby, Rex restless beside her tail flicking against the seat. "We should go," her mother said, looking nervously at the sky. "That storm's moving fast." Mark nodded. "Get down the ridge before the bridge floods." He looked toward Rex, the dog's ears, high gaze fixed on the tunnel. "He knows something's wrong," Lily whispered. "He keeps looking at the concrete like he can hear through it." Mark almost smiled. Dogs remember what people forget. The wind picked up sharply, then scattering loose tarps and shaking the scaffolding. Howard shouted orders to his men, but half of them were already heading for their trucks. Lightning flashed across the ridgeline, illuminating the valley in a single white breath. The crack of thunder that followed rolled through the ground, and the newly poured section of the seal shuddered. A deep sound came next, a groan like the earth itself shifting under strain. "Move back!" Mark yelled, running toward the slope. The upper edge of the ridge gave way, first rocks tumbling down in a blur of dust and debris. The noise was deafening. Concrete split like brittle bone. In the chaos, Mark turned just in time to see Rex leap from the truck, racing toward the tunnel. Rex, no. Lily screamed, but the wind swallowed her voice. The dog disappeared through the narrow gap left open by the workers, his coat flashing once in the lightning before the dust swallowed him. Mark sprinted after him, but a second tremor shook the ground. The last scaffold beam collapsed, blocking the entrance in a spray of rubble. He fell to his knees, coughing, eyes burning from dust. "Rex!" He shouted, his voice hoarse. The echo came back faint but real, a bark muffled and desperate somewhere beyond the stone. "He's alive!" Lily cried, running to his side. Mark pulled her back. "You can't go in there. It's too unstable." Her hands trembled. He went for something. He had the collar, he knew. Mark froze, remembering the ledger hidden beneath Rex's tag. He went to get the box, he said quietly. He saw them leave it near the door. Lightning split the sky again, closer this time, the thunder crashing almost on top of it. Rain came hard, flooding the ditches, washing mud down the slope. The air turned electric. Mark looked at the blocked entrance, then up at the ridge above where an old service map had shown a secondary ventilation shaft. "There's another way in," he said. "An escape tunnel. It's narrow, but it leads to the main chamber." Lily grabbed his sleeve. "You'll get buried." "Maybe," he said, "but he won't." He squeezed her shoulder. "Stay with your mom. Keep the road clear in case we make it out." Without waiting for an answer, he ran upslope, his flashlight cutting through sheets of rain. The escape shaft was hidden beneath years of moss and stone, but he found the metal grate half bent, half buried. The hinges screamed when he pulled it open. Cold air rushed out, smelling of dust and kerosene. He dropped inside the narrow passage, pressing close on both sides. The beam of his light caught the faint shimmer of old rails and rusted pipes. Water dripped in slow, echoing intervals, each sound marking the seconds. He crawled forward, feeling the mountain tremble above him. The tunnel bent left, then down. Finally, the beam of his light found a break ahead. A small chamber half collapsed, the air thick with dust. And there, wedged between a fallen beam and a pile of rock, was Rex. The dog's flank rose and fell fast, his paws scrabbling against debris. The lockbox was wedged beside him, one handle caught under a slab. "Easy, boy," Mark said, voice low and steady. He dropped to his knees, heaving the smaller stones aside, first then the beam. It shifted with a groan. Rex barked weakly, tail-thumping once. "That's it," Mark said, pulling the dog free. His hands shook from exhaustion, but he managed to drag both Rex and the box back toward the shaft. Behind them, the mountain groaned again, a deep rolling sound that warned of another collapse. Dust rained down, stinging his eyes. He pushed the box ahead of him, one arm wrapped around the dog's shoulders, and crawled until the first thread of daylight glimmered through the grate above. He shoved Rex up through the opening, first the dog scrambling onto the wet grass, barking wildly. Mark followed, lungs burning, arms scraped raw. The rain hit his face like cold glass as he pulled the box out behind him. Lily ran toward them, shouting his name, her mother close behind. Rex broke free and bounded straight to her, wet and shivering, but alive. Mark dropped to one knee, catching his breath. His clothes were streaked with mud, his hands torn. "He had it," Lily said, seeing the box. "He didn't let it go." Mark smiled faintly, rain washing the dirt from his face. "Neither did I." The storm raged around them, thunder rolling across the peaks like a drumbeat from the past. Behind them, the mountain settled again, the rumble fading to silence. Mark looked back at the collapsed entrance water streaming down its face like tears. "Let it rest now," he murmured. "We've taken what it tried to keep." 3 weeks later, the air over Black Hollow carried no echo of the storm, only the thin sweetness of thawed pine and wet soil. The road had been repaired, the debris cleared, and for the first time in a century, sunlight touched the sealed entrance without deceit. Detective Mark Davis stood beside a row of camera tripods and news vans parked along the gravel shoulder. His right arm was still in a sling, but the bruises had faded to the color of dusk. Rex lay at his feet, coat brushed and bandaged in one-place tail sweeping slowly against the ground. Lily knelt beside him, fastening a small silver tag back to his collar. "He still doesn't like loud noises," she said. Mark smiled faintly. "Neither do I anymore." Reporters waited in clusters behind the yellow rope line, their microphones pointed like instruments toward the stone face of the mountain. The county's temporary stage stood where the old work tents used to be. The banner above it read simply, "Black Hollow Memorial Dedication." The governor spoke first, his voice steady but cautious, describing the tragedy in terms of history and justice. When he finished, murmurs rippled through the crowd. It was Mark they wanted to hear, the man who had crawled back into the mountain to bring out not treasure, but truth. He stepped up to the microphone, removing his hat. 122 years ago, he began, 8 men went to work and never came home. For more than a century, we called it an accident. But it wasn't. His words carried evenly through the valley, low and clear. Records recovered from the mine prove that these men were sealed inside alive during a labor strike. They were left to die because speaking up cost more than their lives were worth to the people in charge. The same company that buried them tried to bury that truth again. So did those sworn to protect them. He paused, his eyes lifting toward the crowd. Sheriff Coleman stood near the back, his face drawn and pale. "But the truth outlasts orders," Mark continued. "The families of those men, of Thomas Carter, Benjamin Hart, Samuel Voss, and the others, now have their names restored to public record. Their descendants no longer carry the label of accidental loss. They carry the title of survivors." A hush fell. For a moment, even the reporters stayed still. Lily stood near the front, her hand resting on Rex's back. The wind lifted her hair, and she looked not at Mark, but at the mountain, as though hearing the faint voices beneath. After the speeches, people began to gather near the new memorial. It stood at the tunnel's edge, where the first concrete layer had hardened again, smooth and pale as bone. The monument was simple, a granite plaque set into the rock surrounded by iron rails recovered from the mine itself. Flowers lined its base, wild asters, pine branches, and a single miner's lamp still blackened by soot. Mark approached slowly, the sound of gravel under his boots, soft and final. Lily waited beside the plaque, a folded paper in her hand. "They said I could choose what it says," she told him. "It felt right since my family started it." She unfolded the sheet. The words written in her careful hand were brief. "To those who waited in darkness, your patience became our light." Mark read it once, then, again, his throat tightening. "It's perfect," he said. "You sure you want to give that to them?" She nodded. "They already gave us everything." The mason carved the line carefully into the granite, each letter deliberate and deep. When the last stroke was finished, the wind shifted through the valley, cool and clean, carrying with it a faint scent of oil and stone, familiar yet softened now as though the mountain had finally exhaled. The ceremony ended quietly. Families lingered, touching the plaque, leaving photographs and folded notes between the flowers. Mark stayed until the sun dipped low, turning the rock face gold. Sheriff Coleman approached at last, hat in hand. "You were right," he said quietly. "My great-grandfather signed those orders. The state will open a full inquiry." Mark studied him for a long moment. "Sometimes justice takes its time," he said. "The trick is making sure it still arrives." Coleman nodded, then walked back toward the waiting cars. When the last engine faded down the road, only the wind remained. Lily stood with Rex the dog sitting tall beside her, eyes on the mountain. "Do you think they can rest now?" she asked. Mark looked toward the sealed entrance, the plaque gleaming faintly in the dusk. "I think they already have," he said. Rex barked once, a low, steady sound that rolled through the quiet like acknowledgement. The light dimmed, and for the first time since the seal broke, Black Hollow felt at peace. The past had spoken, the truth had been heard, and the mountain, after a century of silence, had finally fallen still. And that's the story of what really happened beneath Black Hollow. A century-old silence finally broken. What do you think about what was found in that tunnel? Was it justice or just another secret brought to light too late? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from and whether you believe some truths are better left buried. If this story made you stop and think, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more untold histories, and turn on notifications, because there are still places in America where the past hasn't finished speaking.